looking at kind of how, okay, got it. Thank you, Zoom. You interrupted. Okay, so looking at context, I think this is really interesting. It just shows how public spaces are changing due to technology. So this is in China, where on the left side, if you have a cell phone, you're allowed to use your cell phone and walk in that lane. But if you're on the right, you're not allowed to have a cell phone. So it's affecting how we use spaces, how we kind of occupy spaces, and what spaces, how technology kind of infiltrates those spaces. Another example of that is Wi-Fi networks, right? They're everywhere. So this is a guy who was very mad that people kept using his network. So he made his network name "Get Your Own Damn Internet" because he's upset and he locked it, right? So the person who did that decided to create their own network and they made their own. So those kind of things are really interesting. You have conversations using SSID, which is something that we don't really think of. And then if you don't like your neighbors, you make your network name "My neighbors suck," and they get the idea because they're going to see that. So, so I'm looking at kind of how we can affect networks in different ways. This also it was just an ad, but it's on Twitter. It was like me on Instagram cooking and making beautiful food, but then on Twitter sitting in bed naked eating an 8-piece box of fried chicken. It just shows you how the different networks affect the way that you behave on them, and how yourself is put out on these networks really changes based on who your audience is and what type of network it is. So in my talk today, I'm going to talk about dynamic data networks. So things like when we take static identifiers and we add real-time data to them, things that don't typically exhibit real-time data, how do we change that and affect it? I'll look at how mobile media can be repositioned and challenged using apps to kind of change the way that we perceive apps, but also just change the data flow on apps, like how we can actually, once we reposition how we use them and how they look at how we use them, that they can affect us. Also location hacking. So what happens when you add social data to location services, something that you don't see very often on things like phones or on maps, and how do we change that? And also look at human frailty. Like I've done a whole project looking at how all the mistakes that you make in technology could actually be added back to the technology itself. And this is a newer project I've been working on called human error. And I'll talk about that. So when we highlight and reinforce what we do wrong with technology, what does that make us think about how we use the technology? And I even have some stickers here that you guys can have afterwards. So I'll show you after. So starting off with network space. So looking at materialization, this is a picture of the telegraph, right? 1832 by Samuel Morse. And Samuel Morse is actually I think he's buried in Brooklyn. So if you ever want to check out his gravesite, it's just a ... I think don't know his gravesite, but the telegraph, this is a quote about the telegraph by Neil Postman, who started a program at NYU that I used to teach at actually. But he says the telegraph removes space as an inevitable constraint on the movement of information. For the first time, transportation and communication were disengaged from each other, meaning things were instant once you had the telegraph. There's no longer a journey to get from point A to point B. It's immediate, it's fast, like a text message, an email. So my quest with some of this work is, how do we reintroduce the journey back into these systems? How do we make them more human? How do we make them kind of more grounded rather than just sort of immediate, in your face and quick, the way that an engineer would think would be how do we optimize? I'm kind of interested in the de-optimization in a way. How do we bring it back down to our level? So this is an earlier project I made. It's basically just a loading screen, but it keeps loading forever. So it's called Loading, Please Wait. And it plays with our impatience. So the impatience of internet users kind of waiting for their stuff to load. This just loads on and on and on and never stops. And so it's a really simple thing, but it focuses on how all these advances in technology are provoking sort of negative human reactions. Like we get really mad at things when they don't do things the way they're supposed to. And we think that they're going to deliver quickly, and they just kind of go on and on. So how can we actually play with that and play back? So it creates a feedback loop of patience and impatience, an earlier project. And then kind of building off of that, I built this project a long time ago called Crank the Web. And it's like a physical hand crank that when you type in a website, you actually have to download by hand the website. It's like a physical download machine. So you don't pay more for your bandwidth. You actually have to get there yourself through your strength. So this materializes something invisible normally, which is bandwidth, and it emphasizes, we're living in a world now where most of the physical stuff we do or have been doing is now becoming automated, right? There's an automation key like for everything you do. And so we don't have to think anymore. We actually don't have to move as much anymore. And so this brings that back into the foreground, and it resuscitates a really old technology like the crank, which is like 2,000 years old, back to now. The video cranking, it's really loud. That's not so loud. And so it's very loud and in your face, and we wouldn't want to do this every day, but you get the point. So looking at also network presence, I was interested in like the fact that there are websites out there that get millions and billions of visitors, right? But there's no effect on their actual structure after those visitors. But physical spaces, if you get like 1 million visitors to a doorknob, something's going to break with a doorknob. So this is called alerting infrastructure. It's this jackhammer that sits on the side of a wall. Every time the wall of the building, or every time the website of the building gets a hit, the jackhammer starts destroying the actual building. So physical hit counter destruction. So this examines how websites relate to the physical space they represent, sort of like an architectural kind of input system where the building itself starts to feel the damage of the fact that the website is actually overtaking its importance. So how do simultaneous visitors of online and real spaces interact? In that way, you actually hear the drill, and it adds consequences to visiting online spaces. So this is a video, this is an older project back from 2003. So can't believe it's been that long, but it's this is kind of an earlier example here. So this thing just sits on the wall and waits for a visitor. Really. And when you go to the website, you see this, right? It's a hit counter, but the opposite. So it actually tells you how much destruction you caused the building when you go to the site. Very small, but and so it's showing that these physical spaces are kind of losing touch now. We have virtual spaces. We've seen that during the pandemic. So many meetings have moved online, and some of them have stayed online. Yeah. We don't need to. So this is the version 2 of this project, which I haven't made yet. And then I was thinking, how do I take it even further? So extreme, which is this level. Yeah. So this is extreme, which I think kind of makes sense, but we wouldn't go that far to actually destroy it. So moving on from there, I'm really interested in creating critical interfaces, critical things that challenge how we use things. So this is an example of a funny Microsoft keyboard, right? All you need in a Microsoft keyboard is Control-Alt-Delete, because it seems to ask you for that key combination constantly. So why not just make the whole keyboard key Alt-Delete? So looking at interfaces, though, Donald Norman, who wrote this book, The Invisible Computer, back in 1991, still a really influential book, wrote, once an infrastructure gets established, it's difficult to change, for they're deeply embedded into the culture of society, so deeply ingrained in the ways people have learned to live, work, play, that change can take place very slowly, sometimes decades. And we see that with everything from computer interfaces, to cars, to other urban transportation. They're finally phasing out the Lego themed MetroCard vending machines that are there, and they're going to change those. So that took 20 years. I mean, there's a lot of different things that don't change. So I was interested in this, like, how do we affect that? How do we change it? So back in 2003, I was commissioned by the Whitney to do a new project. And I decided to kind of look at social networks in a different way. And so this is actually before social media, before the social media type existed. I made this project called Bumplist. So it's an email community for the determined. So I took an email list that everyone understands how to use, and I made a simple rule change. I made it so that when you join Bumplist, you bump off somebody. So to be part of it, you have to keep joining and you can get bumped. It's kind of like musical chairs meets email in a way. So there's a limit of 6 people that can join Bumplist at any given time. So that placed a rule on accepted forms of online discourse. In this screenshot, there were like 82,000 total subscriptions. I think it got up to almost 800,000 once it kind of word went around. It was written about once in the New York Times, which made the bump rate every like few seconds. So when you affect the structure and constraints of a system, it really changes the community. The people were trying to like figure out ways to stay on this list. They would like, set up their own off list sites that would have the archive. You couldn't read any of the archive at all. You had to be on it. And it became this kind of real shift in the way that a community can exist and would exist. And I think there's a lot of potential to bring it into other types of social media after, social media sort of became a main thing. This is email, but imagine something like this to LinkedIn or to Facebook or to these sites where you can comment endlessly. So there's a scribe link because the website is up, so you can try to join it, see how long you last. It's bumplist.net and give it a shot. So then I'll move into kind of like some other projects of mine that look more at like political and social displays. So there's 3 different projects of mine that examine kind of more like a critical edge to the way that technology could affect things. So also back in 2001, after 9/11, there was the government was thinking about using some software called Carnivore that would basically snoop networks for any kind of terrorist keywords and try to find potential threats that way, which kind of backfired on them because it's sort of Big Brother. It's very Big Brother watching. So there's an artist group in New York, actually, at the time called Radical Software Group that made this software called Carnivore. And that was basically just a packet sniffing software that would run on the machines, any machine, any network. And they asked artists to take the data and do something really interesting with it, do something else, not just find criminals. So I made this project called Police State. It was a physical client. So it used these little remote control cars, and it would look on a network for any suspicious keywords, sort of like bomb threat or terrorist or guns or anything like that. And it would command these little mini police cars to move around in different patterns based on the web traffic. So it's looking at data reappropriation, how you can change static data to kinetic space, sort of information kinetic space, and what strengthens the relationship between data and making it physical. What happens when you bring it out of the screen and actually turn it into something physical? So here's a quick video of this project. This was shown at, hopefully it'll load. I think this is a YouTube clip, yeah. This will load at there. So this was also back in 2003. So like I said, I'm taking you back in time. It'll work. Should be sound, yeah. Not a lot of sound on this video, but. So the idea is that it reverses the role of surveillance. It moves the cars in these random patterns based on the keywords rather than the cops all swarming to one particular location. And they're all synced to the same radio frequency, so they all move in unison. Sorry about the video quality. This is a little but you can see as they're all synced to the same kind of pattern of movement. And then one of them takes a donut break in it right there. Yeah. So skip. So Carnivore PU is the software that you could download for free. I think it's open source now and built into processing, which is an open source programming language. So you can use it as a library now for processing. So it still exists. And this at the time was what the software was. On the right was all the junk coming through, but it was scanning off the web, and then it would find the keywords, find an appropriate police code, which I found online. I think it was California State Police Codes. Once it found the police code, it would translate the police code into binary and send that binary signal to the cars. Based on the order of ones and zeros, it would be right, left, forward, backward. So all these cars move together in sequence. So it's sort of a reversal of police using data to control the police instead of the other way around. Well, I'll move on from there. So also related to cars too, I was interested in, this is kind of, initially it was made at a hackathon that was about kind of making things that were kind of crazy and stupid, but I think ultimately it has a lot of potential in the fact that we don't do enough data integration. So this is a project that takes GPS data, connects it to crime data in a city, and then forces you to drive. It's a GPS application that forces you to drive through the most dangerous parts of the city to get to your destination based on the crime data. So it basically adds this whole extra data layer of things that don't necessarily connect to GPS, which is typically just getting us from point A to point B. So it adds these mapping routes. It creates an active data layer on navigation architecture, and imagines a future of abundant data integration into our daily lives. So imagine other types of applications where you would have a data set that would change the effect. So this is a video that we made for this. I collaborated on this project with about 4 other people. This one's for you.
Bad boys, what you want, what you want, what you gonna do? When you set the sun what you want? Stop! Tell me what you wanna do, what you gonna do? Put your hands behind your back. Yeah. Bad boys, what you gonna do? What you gonna do when they come for you? Bad boys, what you gonna do? What you gonna do when they come for you? When you were 8 and you had bad treats, you go to school and learn the golden rule. So why are you acting like a bloody fool? If you get hot, then you must get cool. Bad boys, what you gonna do? What you gonna do when they come for you? Bad boys, what you gonna do? What you gonna do when they come for you?
So also on this theme of kind of looking at how you can use things like machine learning, artificial intelligence for means like social justice. In 2020, I collaborated with another artist named Mark Ramos, who I was a mentor with at New Ink here in New York. And we looked at kind of the Google's reCAPTCHA software. And we noticed that, when you guys have all used that software where it says click on a crosswalk, right? Click on a light post, and then you can get to your thing. So we looked at that, we're like, well, those images are really banal, but how could we actually change them and make them a little bit more about what's happening now? So we made this system called Protect and Server, where you have to select squares that you think are police brutality based on certain images that you find. And then once you get the right combination, it takes you to a training video game where you actually have to train. They teach you to train like a police officer, to think like a police officer, and what different types of methods in that game you would need to actually diagnose a crime. So this connects actual images with sort of, we added some of the images as anime or icons or things like that to show what are the biases in popular culture that show police brutality, and how does that actually affect, how could that actually affect like sort of a mass audience through use. This project was shown at a gallery in Wales, I think at a show called Protest. The whole show was called Protest, where it looked at protest type thing. So this explores the relationship between police violence, virtual training of police officers through game interfaces. Here's a video that we made for this. That's some of the footage from the game.
Currently following the stolen SUV, heading downtown to South Street.
Oh, police enforcement, VR1. Sort of an academy for learning to be like a cop. So that's that project. So another protest-related project that I thought would be kind of interesting to do is something that I just heard a lot, which is that politicians mainly think that mass shootings are caused by people that play video games, basically, that games cause people to think that way and use them. So this is a project that I did in 2019 called Weapon of Protest that uses a hacked Nintendo light gun that you use for Nintendo games. And I turned it into a networked object. So instead of when you pull the trigger, it emails the NRA a letter of protest to kind of protest the fact that this gun that they're trying to allow people to, they want people to have guns. So it looks at, how you could take these game objects, turn them into network objects against the NRA, which is this horrible organization that keeps trying to force the gun lobby on politicians. And it critically examines this relationship that politicians have between violent video games and mass shootings. There's another video I made for this, and this actually it's using a voiceover from a guy that's talking a bit about this whole problem on his podcast.
We must stop the glorification of violence in our society. This includes the gruesome and grisly video games that are now commonplace. It is too easy today for troubled youth to surround themselves with...
Here, and today I want to talk about a subject that comes up often in American politics, and that's the blaming of the video game industry for violent acts and mass shootings. If you've been following the news this week, then you might know there's 2 more mass shootings in the United States. 20 dead in El Paso, Texas, and 9 dead in Dayton, Ohio. And if you go back a few more days to July 28th, 3 more people were killed in California. And of course, this is only counting deaths and not the massive amounts of life-changing injuries and trauma for those that survive. The United States has a mass shootings problem that's only escalated to an insane level over the past 20 years. There's no denying that, no matter what your political allegiances are. And as a country, we've been pretty stagnant about it when it comes to finding a solution. Gun ownership, the right to bear arms, is something that's deeply ingrained in American culture. So much so that even suggesting a ban on firearms has become a political landmine. So instead, our politicians try to push tighter gun control or occasionally turn to blaming loosely correlated ideas like that violent video games are the reason we have mass gun violence in this country. And with the most recent wave of mass shootings, I hate even saying that phrase, it sounds so crazy that we've just gotten used to it. But with the recent one, our House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy spoke about how video games are dehumanizing individuals. Texas Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick just said in response to the shootings, we've always had guns, always had evil, but I see a video game industry that teaches young people to kill. And then, just today, President Trump said we must stop the glorification of violence.
165 million Americans enjoy video games, and billions of people play video games worldwide. Yet other societies where video games are played as avidly do not contend with the tragic levels of violence that occur in the U.S.
Yeah, so that project really examines how these things are related and trying to kind of make a definite change there. So moving on to another whole other area of research I've been looking into is things like memory and what our devices and the internet is actually doing to our physical memory. So one thing that's happening, I think, is that, we rely so much on the cloud, on things being stored without us having to store them. One thing I asked my students, it was like, if I wiped your address book, how many of those numbers would you actually remember? Most of them say my mom's maybe, or one. So not very many. So this is an example I thought was really funny. I finally realized it. People are prisoners of their phones. That's why they're called cell phones. Pretty true in a way. And this is an example of what's happening to us. So David Brooks wrote an article in the New York Times back in 2007 called The Outsourced Brain. This is 2007. The iPhone hadn't come out yet, right? So what is actually doing to us? The iPhone just came out, maybe it's just then. So he says that I thought that the magic of the information age was that it allowed us to know more, right? So we get all this information from the web, but then I realized that it actually allows us to know less. And why is that? And that's because it provides us with external cognitive servants, silicon memory systems, collaborative online filters, consumer preference algorithms, and network knowledge. So we can burden these servants and liberate ourselves, meaning all these things take over now for our inherent abilities. What does that mean to us? And what's that actually doing to our relationships? I think Wendy's might have seen this one, but this is an example of a conversation that's happening every day now. So, hey, babe, comes back. Who is this? I lost all my contacts, right? We get that a lot. Your boyfriend. Okay. She says, Jake. He says, Kevin. So it's an example of, what's happening now is that, we lost this stuff. When we lose this stuff, what actually happens to our brains, we can't actually get it back. So I built this iPhone app called Contact Rot that actually works just like an address book in your phone. But if you don't contact people, the addresses and the numbers start disappearing. So the numbers go away. The names start getting fading away. So it forces you to keep in contact with these people. Otherwise, you start losing them, just like we do with our heads. So it's a native iOS address book app. It decays these and deletes these unused contacts over time. It reminds us how our devices are replacing our memory, right, with cloud storage, ultimately, and that's the cloud aspect. Numbers and names start deteriorating and fading away, and they only remain if they stay relevant to your life. So imagine maybe like if you have a list of 1,000 people, maybe only less than 100. I think there's a rule that we can only stay connected to up to something like 30 people at a time. Other than that, we just lose track. But people have thousands of friends, right? And so they don't actually keep in contact with those people.
In today's world of ubiquitous memory, virtualization, and network media, we place trust in the cloud to keep our data safe and secure. Memory virtualization allows networked and therefore distributed servers to share a pool of memory to overcome our human physical memory limitations. But what happens when cloud memory becomes as fragile and aging as our own? Names, phone numbers, email addresses of our friends, family, and colleagues begin to disappear and ultimately rots from our memory.
So this is a little demo of that project. See some of the names. It tells you how long it was since you last contacted them. That was a plugin for Facebook. I think a lot of people are scaling right now. At least I know I would. So also on phones, I did a commission back in 2016, I think it was, for a hospital in the Bronx called Montefiore that actually has a fine art program. And they asked me to come up with something that would connect to their waiting spaces, because they have a lot of people in those spaces a lot, and people are kind of feeling anxious and stuff. So this is a project that I did called Healing Destinations, that is a cell phone based Earth that's connected to your phone. And you can actually text a location to it, and it will bring up the location on the Earth. So it's a shared experience where people in the same spaces can all kind of experience maybe their hometown or maybe a place they missed while they're waiting. Another thing that it supports is, so it's built in WebGL, and also uses open source Earth model called Cesium, which is a really cool free model that you can play around with. And it's an interface that allows people to escape the hospital waiting room and creatively travel around the world. I can do a demo of it here, so you guys can try it. Another thing that you can do is you can text a feeling to it. So sad, happy, excited, and it'll take you to a place on Earth that is based on that feeling. So it gives you a whole other way of looking at searching the Earth. I made a quick video too of this. Some of this footage is shot at Montefiore. Some of it is taken off the web. So these hospital waiting spaces are usually pretty desolate, not very friendly. So I'm looking at how we can humanize the experience and make it places where people can actually maybe talk to each other. press on the word beauty, and it'll take you to a place that's considered beauty. Usually it takes you to the middle of the water. But then over time, it builds up like a history. So you can see the earth and see where all the people around you have looked up places. So over time, you get a sense of maybe who's in the room. Maybe you want to strike up a conversation with people, maybe not to feel so isolated, and hopefully change it. And if people are interested in what the tech is behind this, the database that I'm using is pretty interesting. It's just using Wikipedia actually as a database. That way, it's a lot different output. The last one was mine. But I have a demo of this at the end. We can talk. You guys can try. So I'll get on to the last couple projects. So looking at some stuff that I'm doing now, I'm interested in like how we can take sort of human-centered interfaces and actually interfaces in general and integrate all the things that we mess up with these interfaces back into them in order to make them more human. So it's a project that I've been working on called Human Error. And actually after the talk, if you're interested, I got some stickers of this. So I can give you guys stickers. So looking at this project, it's a project I've been working on the last year, and it examines how we're confronted with computer interfaces that are built to be really easy, but in the end, they're really confusing, right? So it's about 16 projects at this point and kind of constantly growing as I kind of build them. And they're software projects, hardware projects, and they integrate elements of human error into their design in order to provoke and materialize frailty, right, when it comes to operating digital devices and interfaces. And so I'm thinking by doing some of this work, it's about how we can, when we design human elements back into the user interfaces, maybe we can create machines that are more like us, and they might pass a Turing test because we could actually, they actually will make mistakes. So the first one was an app that I made. It's called Letter Dialer. So this is an iPhone app similar to your phone app, but instead of the numbers, it gets rid of all the numbers and forces you to dial with letters only, which is the letter combinations, to force you to kind of remember where where the numbers are on the dial pad. Most people don't. So it removes the numbers from the cell phone dialing interface. It highlights errors that we incur on these devices, right, by emphasizing defects to create novel interfaces that expose kind of our errors in general. And then it sort of instigates our continued reliance on software that compensates for our abilities to know this stuff ourselves. And most people will know where the numbers are, but actually a lot of people I've tested this with did not know where the numbers were in the end. Here's a quick video on this project. All the videos are about a minute or two short. So it works like the standard iPhone app, but instead you have to dial these letter combinations to get there. And then it will give you the numbers only after you press the call button. So that's letter dial. The other one I have a demo for is called Camera Face. So this is a camera that will only take bad photos, right? So that's something that we do all the time, but this camera will not work if you're looking at it. And I have a quick demo to show you. So it's an AI infused webcam. It'll only take a photo if someone's not looking at it. So in a study conducted in 2020 by OnePoll Western Digital, over about 2,000 Americans, they found that 41% of those people who were interviewed avoid deleting pictures on their devices. They don't want to delete them, even if they look horrible and there's no one who would ever want to see them. So I'm wondering like where all those pictures get created and how they get created. And so I think I can switch to, I guess it works. Oh, it's not that. It's like, so it's just at humanerror.org/camera face. So there's me, right? So it takes a second, and then it should see my face, right? So it sees my face and I hit snap, but it can't capture. So if I go like this, finger, that should work. And then you go down here to the gallery and there's my picture. So these are all other pictures, bad pictures that people took, and it gives you a date stamp and a time stamp. You can enlarge it and tell you where the picture was. So a lot of people say, okay, what's the point of that, right? Bad pictures, who wants bad pictures? But the larger theme of that makes more sense. I don't know if this is sharing, actually, it might not be, but so that's camera face. Paper Jam is another one in the series looking at common errors. So this is a printer that's modified every 15 prints to cause a paper jam automatically. So that's another thing that we do as humans that is often affects these devices. So if you look at recycling levels in the US, they're only about 21.4%, which is, that's enough office paper we waste every year to build a 12-foot high wall from Seattle to New York. It's kind of sad, but true. Some of that hopefully gets recycled, but I doubt it. And so this highlights the environmental impact of about 10,000 sheets of office paper wasted annually. There's a quick video of this project. So this is somebody trying to use the printer, putting it in, looking back at what happened to their printer. It's jammed. Yeah, you get the idea. It's basically a lot of waste that comes out of these things. Yeah, I think it's definitely troubling, but we're moving to the paperless office that everyone had promised in the future. I don't know if we'll ever get there, but hopefully it'll happen. Yeah, I mentioned that already. Only way to do it is turn it off. So moving on from there, another error project I did was called No Signal, and this is a monitor that will continuously change its source to no signal, no matter what you do. Kind of like what was happening here when we were setting up the setting up the monitor. So it emphasizes this common error of people navigating the non-standardized array of monitor and television firmware that always bugs me so much, that none of this stuff is standardized. It's always different for every device, and so it's really hard to actually for people to learn it because it changes. And so it's an easy error to fix, but it's also true that most people don't know how to fix it. And here's a quick video of this. That's our no signal monitor. Yeah. Training videos, booklets, can't get it to work. Still trying to figure it out. Drives the point down. Connection tends to be it'll be better. And then let's see the last couple things. So I think that if we integrate human error into these things, we might finally realize why we do this stuff in the first place. sorry about that. Yeah, there's more at humanerror.org. Okay. Another error project that I did is called autocorrect. And so this is a, you watch it go. Basically, it's a software autocorrect engine that was hacked to change your typing into sort of elite speak, wrongly typed abbreviations into things that we do and some people can't understand or don't know if they're in the wrong generation even. So whether we choose to or not, our text is changed, highlighted, modified by default unless you turn it off. So it's like spell correct, but instead what it's doing is it's changing it into these abbreviations that we see a lot on Twitter and on messages, but it's built into an everyday word processing software. So it will change your paper when you're writing it to words that you probably won't even remember how they are. Some examples there on the right. And move on from there. So more hardware in the Human Error series. So this is a power strip that I made called Crowded Strip. So it's a power plug that has so many plug holes, you can't fit anything into it, which makes it impossible to plug in a device at all. Crowded Strip. This is a mouse that's been modified so that it only clicks for right. So you only get contextual menus, no normal clicks. This is a power button that only turns things off, has no on at all. So it forces people to try to figure out that error as well. Off. More software in the Human Error series. So this is a demandware is ransomware that demands you to pay ransomware to show you that it is ransomware in the end. So it's like sort of a meta ransomware. Auto delete is an agent on your word processing software that deletes random text from your writing. So over time, your writing just disappears. Spam mailer is an email plugin that turns every email you send into something that's going to get stuck in spam, no matter what you do to send it. So these are all kind of examples of errors, but they're built back into the software. So there's a lot more. So here's a guide to like what all of my projects in the end. This is funny. This is something you can get on Oculus, the Internet Cafe Simulator. I don't know if it's real, but probably not. But that's something that we used to do all the time is go to Internet cafes, and I just simulate that experience. So how would you actually do some of the projects that I'm doing? You subvert network ubiquity, right? So you take network interfaces that people understand, you change them, you modify them, you provoke new relationships with them. You replace interactive context. So in the case of protecting server, we're taking an interactive thing that's very banal and changing it to like a social justice and sort of like more public experience with that. So how do we redefine context and challenge those interactive experiences? With standards, take things that people understand, like in Bumplist and email list or social software. Project I didn't talk about is called Social Isolator, that changes social media into having rules similar to the Bumplist, where you can, like for instance, on Facebook, it will only allow you to like something if other people like things that you like. So it forces you to, or you can't friend people if you have too many friends, because it doesn't want you to add more. So those are another ways of disrupting things. One thing I say also, mistrust the cloud. So look at your personal abilities, try to get those back from digital tools, try to remember those numbers if you can, bring it back. And also disconnect connected objects, corrupt sort of the social interfaces of the Internet of Things. There's a lot of different connected objects out there that's supposed to be smart, but it'd be interesting to see how you can make them more socially connected to each other and to people using them at the same time, but then disconnect them all. And then I just want to talk about this last project. So this is a project that I'm installing in November at the New York Hall of Science. It's going to be up for 3 months. It's called Wordplay, and it looks at kind of remixing scientific knowledge. So it's a game kind of based on the game of Mad Libs that you guys might know, where you have to ask someone for nouns, verbs, adjectives, but instead it uses radio frequency cards, RFID cards that all have words printed on them. And it reimagines the game of Mad Libs by people placing cards on a platform. And then it sort of remixes scientific facts, quotes from famous scientists who are represented in the museum, and also it adds a real-time network output. So it outputs in real time to the website and to Twitter as people create. So you can peer in on the website at any given time and see what's happening in the museum. And there's a little video I made from, this is some shots from when we installed it here in Tate last week. And I made a little video of that I can show real fast. This is the first demo of it. So some of you guys might recognize people in this video. So this is just the nouns and the adjectives, but there's a whole other collection of adverbs and verbs that were also printed. So you're prompted to choose the word type you want, like or that it asks you for, like a verb, a noun, an adjective, and you place it on this platform. And then the platform will change color based on the word. It's going to look a lot nicer when it gets to the thing. And then the word gets entered in the system like that. And there's a time countdown for each word type. It floats over to the group that it's supposed to be in. And then once over time, more and more people can add to the stories. And once they add enough words, they get put into the system to complete once it gets completed. So over time, they complete it. More people there trying it out. And then, so this is a quote from Mary Curie that has been remixed with words that people selected. Jane Goodall. And then on the other side of the screen, it shows what the real quote is. So you get an idea of what you damaged with your Mad Lib composition. But it shows this kind of, effect from the, people in the museum and how people interact. And then it uploads everything to Twitter using @WordPlayExhibit account, and then also to the website in real time. So people can read the story of what was created and the original on the right. Some of them are kind of silly, but yeah. So that'll be up for 3 months starting next month at ICA. And that's it for me. Yeah, so thanks. If you have questions, I'm gonna answer. Thanks for sticking around. And stick around for a demo. We can run a demo too after this, but are we do questions first and then the demo, or demo first? I don't know. Questions first.
Take some questions in person and also for those of you on Zoom.
Yeah.
Feel free to either put the question in the chat or raise your hand.
Yeah. Yeah.
Hey, Marissa.
Yeah.
Your processes. I mean, when you are coming up with a piece,
Okay.
like where you start and then where you let the journey take you.
Okay. Yeah. It really depends. That's a great question. It really just depends on, either what I'm noticing. Usually it's things that I notice when I'm just using technology in general, or if you look at some of the technology behind some of these projects, they're really simple, right? There's like the crank, for instance, is a switch. That's all it is, right? But if you build on top of something small and kind of build it out and bring in a larger thematic kind of question, then it just becomes a bigger thing. So with projects, there's a lot of them. With the address book one, that's a good example, because it's just something that I've noticed myself. Even I forget things more now, and most people I know I talk to do too. So I was like, how can we actually integrate that back into technology that's causing this? How do you actually take something and sort of reverse it back on his head? I had an advisor once, and he would ask me what I thought of something, and then he'd be like, what about the opposite? Like he'd actually just ask me every time what the opposite was. And I thought that was just a really interesting way to think about teaching and just learning. When you flip things on their head, they just tend to change a lot. So usually it's just starting with like a really simple seed idea, something that would that I think is either funny in the case of the drill project, for instance, or like or protect and server, like how do you subvert something, or you take something that people use a lot, right, and you modify things. Like Bumplist is an example of that. Email is something that we use all the time. What happens, simple rules, how they affect it. So I just like to kind of start small and work my way out, I guess. I don't know. It's just about that. Yeah, you just look around. There's so many great things to build on out there. Yeah. Thanks for the question. Any other questions? We can try the demo then if you want. Or any web questions? All right. Okay. Yeah.
I guess related to what
Yeah.
we were just talking about.
Sure.
In terms of process and the things that we forget, the dependencies. That
Yeah.
we developed. And you use the word servant,
Okay.
servants.
Yeah, right. That was in the Brooks quote, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, and it makes me think of the work and writing of Dory Tunstall, who the first Black dean of the design school, and
Wow.
she's based in Toronto. She's amazing.
Cool.
And she talks a lot about how these dependencies, such as, things that we rely on, certain tech, Siri, etc., perpetuate a master-slave
Sure.
relationship, and therefore also perpetuate longer histories of systemic racism. And so I'm just curious, like, your use of the word servant and your critical approach to this,
Right.
what you're sort of getting at there.
Well, that's just using, I think in the context that word came up, it was related to us being sort of this, or technology being our servant. We can direct it what to do. We can tell it what to do. We can program it. We kind of allow it to take us places that we don't necessarily agree with, or even, initially a thought of. But then it'll change the way we behave, like almost completely, and you don't realize it until you're like, oh, I actually do that. So I guess it's in that role. It's sort of like how our behavior is being altered without our knowledge until we maybe can realize it. But if you broke the way that people use technology, or you just stopped it in a certain way, then we'd be really stuck, right? So in a way, we're like reliant on it more than we ever know. And like an example of me is like I had been subscribing to a paper magazine for years that I like shut off a couple of years ago, and I finally just resubscribed to it because I want to go back to paper because I'm like, I can't keep looking at the screen so much. So I'm back on a paper thing, just because I want to try to to see if I can just change just the way I relate to things that way. Yeah.
Thank you. We do have
Oh, good.
a question. The first, what are your thoughts on robocalls?
Oh, interesting. That would be a good project, probably, or kind of maybe making fun of that.
From Nicole.
Oh yeah, that's my sister actually, who's also another artist. So robocalls suck, as we all know. We get lots of them. I think the robocalls used to be from humans, and we're getting less and less of them now. There was an amazing Seinfeld episode, I think, where Seinfeld picked up one of these calls and said, I can't talk right now, but if you give me your home number, I'll call you back at home. And then the person just hung up. So hoping we can do something like that to robocalls, which is like spread the robocall numbers back at them, or sort of like boomerang all the calls. But I think that there's definitely potential to play with there. I haven't yet, but I'd like to. Yeah. Any other questions?
Yeah, another one.
Oh, cool.
Can you talk more about collaborating with other artists or folks in the tech field? As an artist myself, I wonder how to. I wonder and grapple with how much tech to learn on my own and how much to either delegate or find people to collaborate with. I'm interested in your thoughts when technology changing so fast, it can be overwhelming. Yeah,
that's always an issue. I don't necessarily think as an artist, you need to know all the tech, but I think if you have an understanding of how things work and what you need to put a project together, then you can find the right people to help you to get it done in a way that's not going to crash or break. So it's about knowing enough to kind of get you started, I think. If you don't want to go the full way, if you're an engineer, it's totally different because you sort of start off at that level and you can build your way that way. Maybe you might need help from an artist to help you think differently about your approach. But as an artist, it's definitely good to have a base level of knowledge about the things that you might need, unless you want to find someone to do that for you, I guess. But you need more money to do that. So, yeah, so it's not the easiest.
Yeah. Great, thank you. Are there any final
Yeah.
questions?
Oh yeah, sure. Thanks for coming.
a lot of these things that you've shown, they are provocative in a way.
Yeah.
Or anything, it's not particularly useful.
Yeah.
Which of the tools that you've made, and some of them are online available, is there actually one of the tools that people actually use? Has there been like, I really like the context that is here or something?
Oh yeah. So that project was submitted to the App Store and rejected, as a lot of these artist apps do, which I think is a plus. It's like if you don't get a reject from Apple, then you're not doing very well. So yeah, that project kind of got rejected. But that was because they said, actually, I think in their feedback they said there's not enough features, which is the point of that project. If I add more features, then it would not be the project. So yeah, there's that. There's actually an example. So one of the texting projects that I didn't actually talk about in this talk, but it's I did a performance project with SMS in 2003 with 2 other artists where the audience sent SMSs to a screen. That I remade in 2015 and showed it at a conference, and there was a guy there who said, I want to fund this. I want to like start a company with this. And so I worked with him actually to get a web-based version of this thing running. And it was pretty successful for a bit. And it actually was used at conferences. It was used at SIGGRAPH in 2016. It was used for like a marketing thing once for, I think, NVIDIA, they had an event. But that kind of fell flat. Pandemic definitely killed it off. We didn't have live events anymore. And also it just didn't quite get as enough traction. So what I'm going to do with that code now is make it open source and allow people to kind of add their own visualizations to it. And so that's another project I'm going to do is to make it into a bigger tool that people can use. And I'm working on that right now to try to get that out. And because I think at the time it was pretty successful in what it did, but I sort of in the back of my mind knew that it was never going to make money the way that the guy who funded it wanted to do. I was like, who's going to buy this? But as an open tool for conversation in public spaces, it's great. So yeah, so I'm working in both of those areas, but yeah, not everything is a tool. Yeah, sure. Yeah. Hi.
Why do you think recently iPhones have made screen time available? Like, don't you think it's in their best interest instead how this being work?
Oh, I think they did it for parents and kids mainly. Kids that not wanting their kids to be on screens all the time, so it limits their ability to do it. But maybe they did it also for us. Like, if you so there's something called I actually teach some of this in my classes, is a feedback loop, which one of the most visible feedback loops is the traffic speed limit monitor on the road. So when you're driving, it tells you your speed and what the speed limit is. So when people see that number, they slow down immediately to match the speed. And one thing that phones never had is a feedback loop, something that we could see our activity in real time as we're using it. So that's what screen time really does, is it gives you this feedback of, oh, I'm actually spending like 15 hours a day on social media. Like, I got to shut myself off like from this. So in a way that helps, maybe for us to do something else. And you think that manufacturers wanted, the manufacturers just want you to own the device. Apple, they make the software, but they just want you to have it. They don't care about your use really. As long as you have the device. It's the people that probably don't like that are your networks like AT&T, Verizon, Sprint, because they want you to be on there all the time and they want you to use the data. So they're probably fighting back against screen time. Apple's pushing screen time. I don't think it's ever going to go away. It's also built into Macs, Windows. Every device has it now. But it mainly started, I think, for kids more than adults. Yeah. But anyway, just an interesting example. I'm not an expert on that topic, but I think that's sort of what it is. But yeah, good question. Any other questions? Oh yeah. Oh, cool. Awesome.
One thing that I was curious about, obviously, I think there's difference between you do something for a museum versus you have an idea you want to present to the world. I think one thing I'm curious about, how much time do you spend thinking about how engaging the final thing will be? Because some of the things that you've made, especially the last thing, was the words like that's clearly very engaging. This is like for a museum.
Yeah.
And some of the other things, like the button that just turns off.
Yeah. Right. it just depends on the context, like where you're going to show it, who's it's visible to. If you're making something as an artwork, you typically don't really have that in the back of your mind, except for the fact that it should be provocative, it should bring up questions, it should challenge things, and people will latch onto that. But if you're making something like that for the museum, it has to be something that's easy to pick up immediately, no learning curve, and make it an interface that people already understand and already know. The card interface is like, I pay with my credit card that way sometimes, like I already know how to use those systems, so I don't have to learn it. But yeah, it really just depends. I think the more like risky you get, or like the more provocative you get, then the interfaces can become a little more tricky to navigate, because people really want to do that. They're trying to do it. But if it's something less risky, more reward, then it definitely works the other way around for those type of things. Oh, cool. Okay.
This is from Uli Beisner, who's part of the faculty task force.
Nice.
He says, thanks so much for your presentation. As an artist following the work shown in the presentation, I was wondering whether in the end you find technology suppressive or liberating as a medium. What does it signify for you as an artist, and where do you see it going? Yeah,
so there was a book written, I think it was published at MIT Press in 2004, called Protocol by Alexander Galloway. And in that book, he talks about internet protocols as this thing that limits us, that we're all forced to constrict our behavior around these protocols and the way that the rules exist online. But, I think that's something that, as an artist, he's an artist too, so I don't know why he totally focus on that. But I think, like, as an artist, you're trying to kind of break through from protocols. You're trying to invent your own. Another project I didn't talk about was in early 2000s. I built a fountain that would transmit an image, and I sort of invented or tried to invent a white paper for a new internet protocol called H2O IP that would allow water transmit of data. And so that was me trying to create a new type of internet protocol using water droplets, and to see if, like, you could do something like that would totally go against everything that technology is supposed to bring us, which is like hyper efficiency, speed, and this would be like super slow, very messy, not the way that it is meant to be. And that's just another kind of, just those kind of examples are ways that I don't know, that we're trying to, like, kind of circumvent the rules a bit and get away from the protocols, maybe. I don't know, modify them.
Great,
I don't know if that answered it, but
I think we have time for one more question.
yeah, and then we can do the demo too.
Questions? First, we have one more on
Okay.
chat, actually.
Nice.
Yeah, very active online. Fantastic. Carla Guzman says, I'm curious as to the feedback on your work when exhibiting abroad, particularly any countries with different privacy policies or have made more advancements in technology access to the general public. Also, how have your projects been received as the political climate changes as time passes? How does that influence your art practice, and does it inspire you to use different technologies?
Yeah, those are good questions. I think it's definitely gotten more intense over time. Another project I didn't mention, actually, that was sort of influential was I did back when Wi-Fi was kind of blowing up in the early 2000s. I came up with this project called the Wi-Fi Hog, which is basically like a Wi-Fi scanner that has a Wi-Fi jammer built in and a packet sniffer. So when you run it, it'll allow you to only connect to a network, get all the data from the network, and then jam everyone else from using it. So it allows you to hog the entire network for yourself. And the reason why that was important at the time was because you had all these Wi-Fi networks impinging on private spaces. You had public Wi-Fi overlapping private Wi-Fi. And there was an example back in I think it was like 2001 in Portland. There was a square called Pioneer Square that, like, a network, community network group set up a free network in that square. And then Starbucks had a shop on the square, and their network, the Starbucks network, was so powerful that the community network had to shut down. So we had this like battle between open Wi-Fi, and since it's a spectrum, 2.4 gigahertz at the time, was not licensed by government licenses. There's no law against jamming it, for instance. So I was thinking, like, how could I actually help those communities keep their networks active when the corporate networks were taking over? And I think now most of them are free, but there's still so many paid networks out there that force you to pay when you're not going to be using them for a long time. So that was just an example, of how, I don't know exactly how the systems are, affected by other people trying to jam them or challenge them. I think there's a lot of potential here for other types of things like that, even Bluetooth, for instance, or in social media type situation. I don't know if that totally answered it either, but that's just an example. Yeah. But so good for the demo. Yeah, so you guys can try this. Let me get to Chrome if it loads. Let me quit this. Yeah, so in Chrome, I'll try to get to I have a lot of icons over here. Oh, there it goes. So this was a project, the project I did for the hospital, Montefiore. Let me just refresh it. So this is an Earth. So if you take out your phone and you'd send a location to that number at the top, which is 516-874-0789, it should take you to that location. It'll give you feedback to say if it's actually a real destination or not. You can also send a feeling. So like if you send the word happy, it'll go to the happiest place on Earth, which is Disney World, right? Oh, yeah. Let me try to share it. Okay. Nah, how can you? Yeah. Okay. Yeah, somebody sent something. Yeah. Oh, somebody did send happy. All right, how do I get rid of this? Is it hide floating meeting controls? Yeah. So it spends about 30 seconds or so you can read that because it's meant to be in a waiting space. So it's not super quick as far as the next one, but it should tell you that you're next in line if you send a message to it. Might take a second. But you're supposed to, I sent Cornell and it got that right, but it sent it to the wrong Cornell, not this Cornell, the other Cornell. Yeah, so is that working? Yes, so the next one should come up, whoever sent that one. So excited to Vegas. There you go. Perfect. Although I don't know, some people wouldn't call Vegas that exciting. Yeah, so it's a little slow because like I said, it's timed so that you can actually read that, but kind of entertaining. And then it keeps a record on the right of like all the places that it's been to before. One of the innovations for this though is like to use Wikipedia as a database, which is something I was thinking of how to make it as most extensive as I possibly can. Another cool thing about using that as a database is that if you send, for instance, whoever sent Bali, if you send that twice, it's never going to go to the same entry at this, or never the same location twice. It'll give you different locations in that entry. So it adds another thing. So this is the bombings. Crazy. Not the best part of bombing, but yeah. Oh, so yeah, if you send something that doesn't recognize, it might give you that. Yeah, it gives you some feedback if it can't find the right entry. So like I said, it's using Wikipedia as a base. Oh, shaky. Oh. Northwest Trek. So it's just like another way to explore the world that is meant to be social, meant to be kind of, you have the same people in the same location so they can say, oh, that was where I grew up, or oh, that was the place I went to last week. I didn't give you an extra output for that. And some people are interacting with it online. Yeah, so it should time out after about 15 seconds or so. Happy, yeah, there we go again. Somebody said it's still going to just I'm not getting paid for that promotion. No. Yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah. Disney World looks like a construction site from that picture. It's like, or just things are not alive. Yeah, exactly. It's like Hurricane Ian destruction after that, but yeah.
Okay.
So anyway, it goes on forever, but
Yeah. So
do
thank
one
you
more.
so much.
Yeah, and
Really, really
yeah,
fascinating and excellent work.
thanks. Sad.
Yeah. Thought-provoking.
That's a sad nuclear power plant. Yeah. So if anybody would like a sticker too, I have some stickers for human errors. I can give you guys a laptop sticker. But
Thanks
yeah.
to those of you online for joining us.
Yeah,
this
thanks.
evening. And this has been recorded. It will be posted to the landing page for the Design Tech series. So if you have friends or colleagues that were not able to make it, please share it widely. And thanks to all of you who are here in person. Thanks, Jonah.
Yeah, thanks guys. Well, let's see if it goes to the last one. Take it off. Ithaca. Yeah, you got Ithaca. Cornell Law School. All right. Cool. Thanks, guys. Take that off.
We're spinning next door if you like.
Yeah.
Here's my card. Thank
Oh,
you so
yeah.
much.
Definitely.
Really,
Oh, yeah. That was cool.
really appreciated that. Wow.
Yeah, no
You have
problem.
been busy.
I know.